Welcome back to another episode of Smooth Brain EDH, where we make the smoothest plays with the biggest brains. The Smooth Brain crew is back at it again with some casual gameplay, but this time we're tuning up the power. Not quite CDH, but we will be including fast mana and cheap tutors. You know, just all around more powerful and more expensive cards. So let's hop right into it and see what everybody brought. And up first is Jason on Kaalia of the Vast. This is a Mardu Demons, Dragons, and Angels deck that plans on utilizing Kaalia's powerful ability to place them on the battlefield and take over the game. He's also playing a few stacks pieces to ensure his opponents can't put up a fight. He'll keep an opening hand of Plains, Arid Mesa, Mana Confluence, Orzhov Signet, Rest in Peace, Necropotence, and Path to Exile. Up next is Matt on Mizzix of the Izmagus. This is very obviously an Izzet Spellslinger deck, and a very powerful one at that. Just by stringing together a few instants and sorceries, Mizzix can reduce the cost of, let's say, some extra turn spells, and by that time, Matt's already won the game. He'll keep an opening hand of Island, Scalding Tarn, Exotic Orchard, Scavenger Grounds, Phantasmal Image, Veyron, and Temporal Mastery. Up next is Logan on Syr Konrad the Grim. This mono black deck plans to absolutely abuse Syr Konrad's ability. Whether that be milling everybody, destroying creatures on the battlefield, or even comboing off with a Mind Crank. Logan decides to keep an opening hand of Swamp, Nykthos, Strip Mine, Buried Ruin, Mox Diamond, Golgari Thug, and Agadeem's Awakening. Now finally, we have Chandler on Arcades the Strategist. Walls are a pretty fun creature type. They're good at defending, but with Arcades out, they're also good at bashing face. And that's exactly what Chandler plans on doing. And thanks to Arcades' first ability, he's able to keep his hand pretty full. His opening hand will have a Yavimaya Cradle of Growth, Glacial Fortress, Reliquary Tower, Azorius Signet, Arcane Signet, Swan Song, and Illidomri's Call. We're about to hop right into it, but before we do, leave a comment down below on who you think's going to win. While you're down there, be sure to check out all the links in our description. We've got Decklists, podcasts, a Patreon, and we're even starting a brand new channel just for livestream VODs, so go check it out. We're also sponsored by DRAGONSHIELD. Magic the Gathering is not a cheap hobby, and you want to protect your purchases, right? So be sure to pick up some DRAGONSHIELD products from the link below. But that's enough talk. Let's hop straight into this game. It would appear as if Logan wins the die roll. He'll play Nykthos, and then cast his Mox Diamond, pitching Strip Mine when it enters the battlefield. He'll then tap for 2 and cast his top deck, Demonic Tutor. He'll then cast the card he tutored for, Mana Crypt. The turn is then passed to Chandler, who just plays his rinky-dink Glacial Fortress and passes to Jason. Jason will play his Arid Mesa as land for turn, then immediately crack it for a scrub land. Then after a good shuffle, he'll tap for 1 to cast a Grafdigger's Cage. Matt and Logan aren't exactly happy about this because they both enjoy getting things out of their graveyard, whether that be flashback or creatures to trigger Syr Konrad. After this, the turn is Matt's, who plays a Scalding Tarn as land for turn. The turn is then passed to Logan, who saves his Mana Crypt trigger, and then he'll play a Swamp as land for turn. And now with 5 mana on turn 2, Logan casts Syr Konrad. He'll then pass, and Matt fetches for a Volcanic Island on his end step and lets Chandler take his turn while he's searching. And Chandler starts off with a Yavimaya. He'll then tap for 2 to cast his Azorius Signet, and then passes to Jason, who starts off with a basic Plains as land for turn. He'll then play his Orzhov Signet, and then pass the turn to Matt. Matt plays an island, and then decides, you know what, Syr Konrad's pretty good, and I want one too. He'll play Phantasmal Image to copy it. The turn is then passed to Logan, who wins his Crypt trigger again. He'll then activate Syr Konrad, still having 1 colorless floating, to make everyone mill 1. The only creature that is milled is Steel Hellkite from Jason, so Chandler and Jason have to take 2 damage, and Matt and Logan each take 1. Logan then decides to activate it again, and the only creature milled this time is an Archaeomancer from Matt. So, damage is the same. Logan then plays Bajuka Bug on Jason, and then passes the turn to Chandler. Chandler will start off by tapping for 2 and casting an Arcane Signet. He'll then tap for 2 more to cast Illidomri's Call, finding an Esper Sentinel to his hand. He'll then play a basic Plains as land for turn, cast the Esper Sentinel, and then pass the turn to Jason, who starts off with a Mana Confluence, and thanks to Yavimaya, it doesn't make him lose life if he taps for green. So, continuing on, he'll tap for 2 to cast a Boros Signet, and he will pay the 1 for it.
Remember, kids, always pay your taxes.
Thanks, Jason. After this, he'll play a Rest in Peace, which immediately makes him priority target for both Matt and Logan. And 1 creature leaves Matt's graveyard this way, so his Phantasmal Konrad will deal 1 damage to everyone else. And Logan is now panicking because his Feed the Swarm, his only way to remove an enchantment, got milled and is now exiled. The turn is then passed to Matt, who begins colluding with Logan, stating that the best form of removal is player removal, so they both agree to start hitting Jason with their Syr Konrads. so Matt will play an Exotic Orchid as land for turn, and then he'll move to combat, swinging his Syr Konrad at Jason. Jason can't block, so he takes 5, and then Matt will pass the turn to Logan. Logan will win his Mana Crypt trigger for the 3rd time in a row, and then he'll play Gaia Reach Sanitarium. After this, he'll play Golgari Thug. Then we'll move to combat, hitting Jason for another 5 with his Syr Konrad. The turn is then passed to Chandler, who will play a Sunpetal Grove as land for turn, then tap for 4 mana to cast his commander, Arcades. After this, the turn is passed to Jason, who starts off by playing a Talisman of Hierarchy, not paying the 1 to Esper Sentinel. He'll then tap for 3 mana, having to lose 2 life, 1 from his Talisman and 1 from his Confluence, to cast a Necropotence. After this, he'll pay 6 life to it to exile the top 6 cards of his library. Then, with his last white, he'll cast a Path to Exile targeting the Phantasmal image, and since it is being targeted, it will have to be sacrificed. Matt's not happy about this, and he can't stop it, but he can spread the pain. He decides to cast Expansion, copying it, and with the new copy, he targets Chandler's Arcades. Unlike Matt though, Chandler can do something about it, so he honks the copy. So now the Phantasmal image trigger will resolve, and then the Path to Exile will fizzle, seeing as it has no target anymore. Jason will then pass and gets his Necropotence cards, and Matt will start off with a Reflecting Pool as land for turn. He'll then tap for 3 to cast his Veyron, and then he'll move to combat. He'll swing his 2/2 bird at Logan, who just has to take it. The turn is then passed to Logan, who loses his first crypt trigger, taking 3 damage. He'll then play a Thespian Stage as land for turn, and then moves to combat to hit Jason for 6. Fortunately, Jason can't do anything about it, and he's getting real low. Now in second main, Logan drops a Cavalier of Night, sacrificing his Golgari Thug to blow up Matt's Veyron. Matt responds by casting March of the Swirling Mist, exiling a Temporal Mastery from his hand, so X is 2. His first target is going to be Veyron, and then he decides the second is going to be the Cavalier of Night. He doesn't pay the 1 to Esper Sentinel, and then both creatures are phased out. And after this, the turn is passed to Chandler. And suddenly, at the beginning of Chandler's turn, he is visited by a local Bobo the Cat. Unfortunately, this is a game of Magic the Gathering, so the cat cannot stay, but I hope you guys enjoyed that. Now on his first main, Chandler will play a Reliquary Tower as land for turn. Then we'll tap for 2 to cast Wall of Omens, drawing 2 cards when it enters the battlefield. After this, he'll tap for an additional 2 to cast 3 visits to find his Spara's headquarters to the battlefield. After this, he'll move to combat and swing 3 in the air at Matt, and then pass the turn to Jason, who starts his turn off with the basic plains as land for turn. He'll then drop a Dark Ritual, not paying for Esper Sentinel. He'll then cast a Sword of Feast and Famine with that 3 black mana, then cast Kaalia, and then after that, with his last 2 mana, he equips Kaalia with the Sword of Feast and Famine. Then he'll pay 2 life to Necropotence to exile 2 cards. After this, he moves to end step, and those cards are put in hand. The turn is now Matt's, and Veyron phases back in. Now in his first main, he'll play an island as land for turn. Then we'll tap for 4 to cast Mizzix. After this, he moves to combat and swings for 2 at Logan, who has no choice but to just take it. Matt then passes, and on end step, Logan copies Reflecting Pool with Thespian Stage. And then Cavalier of Night will come back at the beginning of his turn. He'll then win his Crypt trigger, and then play Buried Ruin as land for turn. Logan is unfortunately in a pretty tough spot, and he doesn't want to lose any of his creatures by swinging into Jason, so he'll just pass the turn to Chandler, who just starts off with a Boulderloft Pathway as land for turn. He'll then tap for 3 to cast a Stalwart Shield Bearers, and sorry, yes, that is right under the card art, sorry about that. He will draw a card when it enters the battlefield, then he'll free cast a Mox Diamond, discarding a Temple Garden. He'll then move to combat, and he'll swing Wall of Omens at Matt for 6, and Arcades at Logan for 3 commander. They both just take it, and then Chandler will just pass the turn. Jason will start his turn off with an Exotic Orchard, then we'll tap for 7 mana to cast Angel of the Ruins. Logan decides to respond by tapping his Mana Crypt and then activating Gaia Reach Sanitarium to have everyone draw and discard, or rather draw and exile. After this, the Angel will resolve, and the ETB trigger will target Necropotence and Esper Sentinel. Jason will then drop a Deafening Silence, which completely shuts down Matt. He'll then just pass the turn to Matt, who will start off by dropping Time Warp, netting himself 2 experience counters thanks to Veyron. Matt will then move to combat and swing for 2 in the air at Logan, and then will pass to himself. Now in his second turn, he'll drop a Mana Crypt. Unfortunately, that's really the only benefit he got from this, so he'll pass to Logan, who wins another Crypt trigger. Logan unfortunately is not finding much, so he'll reactivate Gaia Reach Sanitarium to have everyone draw and exile a card. Logan then plays Agadeem the Undercrypt tapped as land for turn, and then will pass the turn. The turn is now Chandler's, and he starts off with a Mox Opal. He'll then move straight to combat and swing for 6 damage at Logan with his Wall of Omens, and then 6 at Matt through Arcades and his Shield Bearers. Matt decides not to block, and after some thinking, Logan also decides to not block. Then Chandler will just pass the turn to Jason, who also immediately moves to combat, swinging Kaalia at Logan. Kaalia will trigger after attacking, and Jason puts in an Ancient Copper Dragon. They'll both connect, and Jason will roll an 18 off of his dragon, and then Logan discards Reassembling Skeleton off the sword. Now in post-combat, Jason sacrifices 8 of his treasures to cast Archfiend of Despair. So if Jason makes it to his end step, this will kill Logan. The Archfiend will resolve, and then Jason will move his sword over to it. Jason then moves to instep, and in response to the trigger, Logan will float 5 mana with Nykthos, and then float an additional 3 to activate Syr Konrad 4 times, milling everyone for 4. The trigger will then resolve, killing Logan, and then the turn is passed to Matt. Matt will win his crypt trigger, and then tap for 3 to cast a Rhystic Study, and then pass the turn to Chandler. And who could have seen this coming? Chandler stops him on his instep, taps for 7, and overloads a Cyclonic Rift. And will pay the 1 to Rhystic Study. Chandler will then move to his turn, then move to combat, and attempt to swing lethal at Jason, but Jason's got an Anguished Unmaking, and he points it at Arcades. Chandler fires back with a Force of Negation, but Matt has a mana drain, and he points it at the Force. So the Force is countered, and then Arcades will be exiled, and Jason will lose 3 life. The attacking walls now just kind of bounce off Jason, and then Chandler will move to his second main, where he just recasts Arcades for 6 mana. He'll then drop a Sylvan Tutor, finding Tetsuko Umezawa and putting him to the top of his deck. The turn is then passed to Jason, who then recasts his Arcane Signet, and then will recast Kaalia, then pass the turn to Matt. He also has to discard 4 cards on his cleanup. Now in Matt's pre-combat, he'll get 3 colorless mana. He'll then recast Mizzix and his Mana Crypt, and Chandler will respond to the Mana Crypt by casting Swords to Plowshares, targeting the Mizzix. Matt is now put in a tough spot, but ultimately decides to cast Dualcaster Mage to copy the Swords to Plowshares to exile Arcades. So both Mizzix and Arcades are exiled, Chandler will gain 3, and Matt will gain 2. After this, Matt will cast Rhystic Study, and then passes the turn to Chandler, who immediately taps for 2 and casts Tetsuko Umezawa, and will pay the 1 to Rhystic Study. He'll then tap for 8 mana to recast Arcades, this time not able to pay for the study. He'll then move to combat, and swings for 9 unblockable at Jason, who unfortunately can't do anything about it, so he will die here, and then the turn is passed to Matt. Matt will lose his Mana Crypt trigger, taking 3, and then on his first main, he'll tap for 6 and cast Mizzix again. He'll then cast a 1 mana Jeska's Will, getting another experience counter, exiling Boseiju, Mana Geyser, and Apex of Power, and then getting only 1 red mana from Chandler. He'll then play the Boseiju as land for turn, and man, if that Boseiju had just been an untapped red source, Matt could have cast the Mana Geyser, then cast the Apex of Power, and done so much this turn. Unfortunately though, he can't do anything with what he's got, so he has to pass the turn to Chandler, who immediately moves to combat and swings everything at Matt for 13 damage. Matt just has to take it, and then Chandler will play a Rogue's Passage as land for turn, then pass the turn. Matt makes his Mana Crypt trigger on his upkeep, and then will tap for 1 to cast Irenicus's Vile Duplication, targeting Mizzix. Chandler does respond though by channeling Otawara to bounce Mizzix, making the duplication fizzle. After this, Matt will recast Mizzix, and then cast a Mind's Desire. Storm Count was 2 because Otawara is an ability, not a spell, so he'll flip 3 cards off the top of his library, the first being Mana Confluence, the second being a Mountain, and the third being Big Score. He'll play the Mana Confluence as land for turn, then cast the Big Score, discarding a Melik, Is It Paragon? He'll then draw 2 and make 2 treasures, but unfortunately the 2 cards he draws are a 1,000-Year Storm and a Mountain, which don't help him at all right here, so he'll concede the game to Chandler. Who is the winner? Way to go, man! Well everyone, there you have it. What'd you think? Are you a fan of these high-power casual decks that play fast mana and tutors? Let us know in the comments down below what you thought. I personally was a big fan of this game. Faster mana and some tutors meant that we got to see bigger, badder threats hit the board even sooner and more consistently. One downside of it though is the fact that some of the cards in the decks are kinda overused. So yeah, once again, let us know what you thought in the comments down below. And while you're down there, be sure to check out all our links in the description. There's a lot of extra content and even a new channel that we're starting just for podcasts and live stream VODs. But that's enough for today, you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Have a smooth day.